There are certain chemicals that will affect the heart rate. From the autonomic nervous system, norepinephrine and acetylcholine will affect it. We also have stuff that will be blood-borne and from the adrenal glands, like the epinephrine, for example, and they're very good at stimulating the heart. Some other stuff that can affect the heart rate, nicotine. A lot of people think that when they sit down and smoke that cigarette that they're actually resting, but in reality it's stimulating the heart. The thyroid hormone, hypo and hyperthyroidism, will affect the beating of the heart. And then caffeine, most of the time people who drink a lot of caffeine, they might find that they have a fast or an irregular heartbeat. Some of the electrolytes that will affect the beating of the heart, potassium is a major one. Potassium, if we have too much, basically the heart rate will slow down. It can become irregular, and actually it can, the heart can stop beating altogether. If there's a deficiency in the potassium, if there's not enough, basically they're overstimulated. I know, seems backwards, but if you remember, that's how it's been for a lot of things. Calcium is also has an effect on the heart. If we have too much, this actually decreases the heart rate, but the contractions get stronger. If there's not enough calcium, we can have an increase in the heart rate, but the contractions, if we have too much calcium, the heart rate decreases and the strength decreases. If we don't have enough calcium, we're increasing the heart rate and the strength, neither of which are good because both are going to affect the cardiac output and therefore the overall function of the heart and the effects that it's going to have on the body. Now, another factor that can be tested for the heart is the stroke volume. If you remember, that was earlier in one of the previous slides. With stroke volume, it's governed by some different variables: preload, contractility, and afterload. For example, if the preload, what's coming back to the heart, gets increased, this will increase the contractility, and that will increase the stroke volume. And if we increase the stroke volume, then that's going to be a load on the heart. Now, if afterload gets increased, we need to decrease the stroke volume, and that's going to allow for a little bit of the recovery. When we talk about preload, basically, what is the tension on those cardiac muscle cells in the ventricles? And what is this tension before contraction happens? So, if preload increases, we're going to increase the force of that contraction. Exercise is a good example. Exercise increases the venous return. So that means when you begin to exercise your muscles are going to require more materials. They're going to use more fluids. Using more fluids means that we're going to have to get the fluids to those tissues. Those tissues have to use it, and we have to return it. And therefore, we're increasing that venous return. If we increase venous return, the myocardium has to match it. So we get more tension during the contraction. And therefore, the contraction will be stronger. We'll get a stronger push of fluid out of the heart so that we can match the demands on the other tissues being created by the exercise. There is a law that governs this function. It's called the Frank-Starling law. Basically, what this is saying, as long as it is a healthy individual, the heart will match the demands placed upon it. So if we do begin to exercise and we do need to increase the volume of the blood, the heart will work to match the demand. So they will increase in the blood flow, increase in the contraction, and therefore provide the body with the materials needed for the demands from the muscles. The contractility, this is how hard those muscle cells or that myocardium are going to contract for a certain amount of the preload. Now, when we look at contractility, there are things that will either increase or decrease the ability for the contraction. We've already mentioned the calcium. Other parts or other chemicals that are in the body that can affect the contractility. Catecholamines, these play or act on the calcium. Glucagon, digitalis. And if you've never heard of this, this is actually a medication given to some people who have problems with their heart and the calcium levels, and they're actually given digitalis to help treat the heart so that the heart can contract and beat correctly. These would all be positive effects. The negative effects are the ones that we've mentioned before. The calcium levels, the information coming from the autonomic nervous system, how is that affecting those ventricles for their contraction? Now, if we have preload, we also have something called afterload. What is left over after the blood is ejected? The largest part of afterload is the pressure in that aorta and the pulmonary trunk, those big vessels. When we have issues of blood pressure, someone who is under chronically high blood pressure, this affects the loads on the heart. It can affect it to the point where their heart muscles continue to stretch and stretch and stretch, the ventricles of the heart, that they continue to stretch to a point where they can't recover. And this can lead to other issues for the beating of the heart. It's a reason that it becomes so important to treat high blood pressure problems. When we talk about impeding the circulation, other issues can affect the circulation. Lung diseases. If we there's an issue called cor pulmonale. This is where the right ventricle fails because there is an obstruction to the pulmonary circulation. Good examples of ways that the heart will be affected with this load, basically the amount of fluid that needs to come in and the amount of fluid going out, and then the actual contraction, the pressure that's going to have to be put to move that fluid. And this becomes very much an issue in chronic diseases such as emphysema, chronic bronchitis, black lung disease. Those are actually affecting areas that are for the respiratory system, but because the respiratory system and the cardiac system are closely related, that effect from the respiratory system begins to affect the cardiac. Exercise, like I've said before, exercise makes the heart work harder. It increases the output. We're going to find that the body has to match the demands that are being made on it. However, if the exercise is done on a regular schedule, then you will begin to see that the heart and the body adapt, and they actually become more effective. Now, for the rest of this chapter, as you look at just some more information about exercise, as you begin to look at the rest of the chapter moves into different diseases, different coronary artery diseases. Read over these, be familiar with the coronary artery disease that they talk about, and get familiar with the different symptoms and so forth. I won't go into great detail, but you do need to be familiar with these different coronary artery diseases. A lot of them are very common. They're going to happen as we age, okay? Some of them can come from chronic hypertension. Some of them can come from certain diseases. So just read through these and have a familiarity with coronary artery disease.